Nice. All right, let me get my right screen up here. So hello everyone, and thanks for making the time to join us this evening. My name is Michael, and I'm the events coordinator and publicist at Annie Bloom's Books. For those of you who aren't familiar with the store, we're in Multnomah Village, 7834 Southwest Capitol Highway in Portland, Oregon. We've been around for a little over 40 years, and we are still plugging along despite everything that's going on in the world. Our store is currently closed to browsing, but our website is always open, annieblooms.com. You can shop there day and night. We offer curbside pickup, local delivery, and shipping options. We do gift wrapping. We're encouraging people to shop for the holidays extra early this year because, you know, everything's going on. It's crazy. Yeah, and we have a bunch of great events coming up after this one. So let me tell you about some of those. On Monday, the 28th, we have Nancy Lane. She's from the Medford area. She has a good book called Pretty Chrysanthemum and Other Stories. On October 1st, Thursday, we have Jessica O'Dwyer and Katie Schultz, who's a former Portlander. They're both on the same press. On Tuesday, the 6th, we have Richard Kreitner, Break It Up, which is a book about secession. Hey, West Coast secession, let's think about that. Yeah, so lots of other good events. You can go to our website. There's an events pull down menu. You can check all those out. There's a coming up soon. Let's see. Tonight, we are delighted to be hosting Portland author Catherine Hamilton. And I forget actually, Catherine, did you have signed copies of your book at the store?
They just were delivered. A new stack was just delivered yesterday.
Okay, I saw that, yeah,
yeah, so
signed copies. All right, cool. So you can get signed copies of her book at this address that I'm about to post right in the chat. Here. That's the event site, and the book is also available on there. So yeah, signed copies of the book are available at Annie Bloom's. Click on that link, pick up a book. Even if you have your own copies already, great for gift giving occasions. And after Catherine does her reading, there'll be a Q&A session, of course. So you can post questions into the chat, or we can open it up at the end. We'll see how we want to do that. And now, something about Catherine Hamilton. She's a native Oregonian of Polish descent. She was born in the small town of Sweet Home. After finishing high school, she moved to Portland, where she graduated from Lewis and Clark College in 1984 with a master's degree in psychology. She spent 12 years as a psychotherapist, publishing over a dozen articles in her field. In 1996, she closed her private practice to become chief editor for a physicians organization. She spent her time writing on issues of politics and religion, as well as human interest stories. And this is pretty amazing, I thought. In 2000, she met Pope John Paul II in his private library and presented him with some of her writings. Catherine has a chapter in Polish American historian Dr. Richard Lucas's recent book, Forgotten Survivors, Polish Christians Remember the Nazi Occupation. Her chapter tells the true story of Catherine, I'm going to mispronounce this, Graczyk, all right, cool, who is your cousin, another cousin, and therefore Rachel's cousin, who was kidnapped from her village in Poland and taken to Germany by a slave labor organization targeting Polish teenagers during World War II. Her stories, articles, and poems have appeared in newspapers and magazines, including the Sarasota Herald Tribune, the Oregonian, the Chicago Polish Daily, the Catholic Sentinel, and Brainstorm magazine. A member of Willamette Writers and the Catholic Writers Guild, Catherine Hamilton is a member of the Cathedral Parish, and she lives here in Portland with her husband. All right, take it away, Catherine.
Well, thank you, Michael. That was a beautiful introduction. And I just want to thank Annie Bloom's again for hosting, for Michael for facilitating. And she's not here right with us today, but Ruby also at Annie Bloom's and all the people there that work in the store all during the COVID have already sent out to people's homes across the country signed copies of Victoria's War. And with those signed copies, you get this nifty little custom-made bookmark that I had the artwork done for. So if you haven't gotten a copy, or like Michael said, if you have a copy and you have a niece or a cousin, another cousin that might want to read the book, you can find it at annieblooms.com. So many people went into this book and made it possible. And first and foremost, I want to thank my beloved husband who's here today, Greg Hamilton. Thank you, sweetheart. And he read all my drafts and always believed that I could tell Victoria's story. And finally I did. So Michael, you pretty much introduced me, but let me just tell you guys, for those of you who haven't heard about the story, Victoria's War is a World War II story about 19-year-old Victoria Darski, a Polish Catholic woman kidnapped into slave labor during the Nazi occupation of Europe, and about amateur artist Etta Tod, a 20-year-old German woman who's the daughter of Victoria's captors. So just a word about the historical fiction genre, specifically the World War II era. We all know, us here in the room, that there are stacks of World War II stories out there, right? And we've read them. These are stories like the Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society, Sarah's Key, The Zookeeper's Wife, and more recently, The Lilac Girls, and All the Light We Cannot See, one of my all-time favorites. And I'm sure you have read some of those. And I know I have a whole shelf full of World War II stories. And during the 10 plus years I was writing Victoria's War, every year a World War II story came out, maybe two. But the amazing thing about this era is that people just can't seem to get enough of it. So yay, because this year it's my World War II story, Victoria's War, and a story that hasn't been told before until now. So what I'm going to do tonight is I'm going to do 3 segments, 3 readings for you, and I'm going to introduce my 2 female characters, first Victoria and then Etta. Their stories parallel and then they intertwine. So I'll do a section from Victoria's chapter, Etta's, and then when they first meet in the bakery attic where Victoria is held, the same place that Etta has been hiding her anti-Nazi paintings and drawings for years. So let's get started. Chapter 1. Łagodny, Poland, September 1st, 1939. Radio changed Victoria Darski's world. It brought swing jazz and blues into her living room. And on the 1st of September, when she sat on the high-backed sofa and reached for the brass knob on the cabinet radio, it brought news of war. This is a special announcement, the commentator said. German tanks crossed the Polish border in a devastating pre-dawn attack that Hitler launched against Poland. Victoria sat upright. Her hands trembled as she dug to the bottom of her black leather handbag and pulled out rosary beads, a cotton handkerchief, and her train ticket. Departure 9/1/1939. 11 a.m., the stamp on the ticket read. Her train would leave in 2 hours to take her to the women's dormitory at the University of Warsaw. She was supposed to start her first semester tomorrow. The announcer was saying that all university classes were suspended indefinitely, but Victoria's suitcases sat packed and waiting in the front hall closet. Can it be true? Victoria crossed one leg and then the other to buckle the straps on her platform shoes. She hurried to tell her parents the horrible news. By 12 noon, Victoria joined her mother and her sister Elizabeth in kissing Papa's freshly shaven cheeks, telling him to come home safely. The Army Reserves had called him into active duty. It was the first time Victoria had seen her parents cry in each other's arms. When the long embrace ended and the goodbyes were whispered, the Darski women, Victoria, her mother, and Elizabeth, remained at home, glued to the radio all hours of the day and night, believing that at any moment the Germans would turn back, that Western Europe would come to Poland's aid. Victoria's bags still waited in the front hall closet 28 days later when Hitler raised the German flag on the Warsaw Capitol building. She couldn't listen to jazz because Chopin's dirge was the only tune playing out of Warsaw. But she played the radio anyway. It was her only solace, her quasi-escape from being held hostage in her own home. It muffled the sounds of her sister bickering with her mother about the impossibility of cooking with little to nothing. No salt, no butter. Would there ever be potato dumplings again? Sausage or bacon or ham? Thankfully, over the noise of the cupboards slamming in the kitchen, Victoria heard Chopin. That is until Elizabeth stormed into the living room and said, "Mother wants you to turn the radio off and come help me bring the laundry in from the clothesline." Victoria didn't look up. She straightened her dress hem and ignored Elizabeth. Not until Elizabeth switched the radio off did Elizabeth look at her sister. Elizabeth's face was blushed brighter than the red polka dots on her blouse, and Victoria said calmly, "I've been 14, Elizabeth. I know it isn't easy, but at least try and behave like a lady." Elizabeth crossed her arms defiantly. "No, you need to help me with the laundry." None of them had set foot outside in weeks, at least not past the clothesline in the backyard, not since the Germans arrived in Lagodny and gave them strict orders not to leave the property. Being cooped up in the house was putting them all on edge. Victoria took a deep breath and gathered her thoughts. "The point is, Elizabeth, I'd be at the university if it weren't for Hitler. My suitcases are packed, sitting out there in the hall closet, and I don't plan to let them sit there forever. There is a chance that Britain and France will show they've declared war on Germany, and this occupation could end, and when it does, I'll be out of here." Elizabeth's perfectly round face and delicate features hardened. "I'd love to see you go to Warsaw. I'm praying for it. Then I won't have to watch you dress up day after day as if you're going off to college, wasting your time on tying all that ribbon in your hair. Why can't you face the truth?" Victoria stared at her sister. She had taken time on her waist-long French braid, elaborately weaving in the thin pieces of indigo ribbon. And why not? They had all the time in the world. But it never helped to reason with her sister. "Right now, I'm thinking how nice it would be if you didn't treat me like the enemy." Victoria switched the radio back on. "You go get started. I'll be right out." Victoria again turned up the radio volume. The lamplight threw a hazy glow over the front room, and she found a sense of comfort in the smells of her mother's cooking. The midday meal would begin, as always, with soup. Today it would be a clear beet soup, followed by potato cakes and sliced apples. She was too hungry to care that the food would be served without salt or butter. They had run out of salt days ago, and no one could go to the market. No one could even so much as visit a neighbor to borrow salt. Not until they had ID cards. Even with the radio turned up loud, the dirge didn't muffle the sound of the crucifix rattling on the wall behind the sofa. Someone was pounding at the front door, and nobody but the Nazis made a heart-stopping knock like that. Victoria came to her feet, dizzy with fright, loathing the visitor outside, thinking how wrong it was, that they were still banging and she needed their permission to leave the house. She was old enough to make her own decisions. Maybe This means our ID cards have arrived. Perhaps she could dispel her fear and go see Sylvia and borrow some salt. She and her best friend hadn't seen each other in weeks. Mother reached the door as Victoria detected through the curtains the silhouette of a man's hat, the high-peaked cap and thin leather brim she'd seen so many times before. "Untermochen, open die Tür," the man demanded in a loud voice. But who knew what that meant? Chapter 3. Magdeburg, Germany. Etta Tod sat perfectly silent in the surgery waiting room at Mercy Hospital. Her mother sat next to her, hands folded in her lap. On the wall across from them hung a poster portraying an athletic youth with a red armband on his left sleeve. On the red band was a black swastika. The athlete's hair was blonde and his eyes blue like hers. He exuded perfect health. If Etta had drawn this poster art, the man's face would not be pious but strained. The backdrop would capture something hidden, a message about the evils of war, rather than the workaday rendering of a Nazi flag on a pole. Her poster wouldn't say, "Everything Nazi is good and perfect and true." That was a lie. A shame that artists wasted their talents on propaganda, on advertisements that hailed the Hitler Youth, a group that excluded young people like Etta. A deaf artist would never get a job drawing for Nazi propaganda. Not that she would take such a job if it were offered to her on a silver platter. Etta loved her attic studio and wanted to be there right now, with her pencils and sketch pads sitting on her artist mat, not sitting in the hospital. In her studio, her easel and paintings lived with the sweet smell of paint drying on canvas. She hated hospitals, the smell of disinfectant, the cold, hard chairs, and the bitter taste of iodine on the thermometer when the nurse stuck it under her tongue. But no one asked Etta what she liked or disliked, because she couldn't speak and they couldn't sign. The government required Etta to have a procedure. All deaf people had to have it. She knew why. She wasn't an idiot. The only thing her mother had told her about the procedure was that her stomach would hurt for a couple of days afterward, but she'd be glad to be rid of her monthlies, which was also a lie. Etta didn't mind her monthlies. She had taken pleasure in being a woman and hoping one day to be a mother since the first day they started. She turned 13 the very next day. But her mother said she would be glad not to have to launder her necessities every month. Her mother hadn't looked at her since they stepped inside the waiting room. It didn't seem right for the government to make a person have a surgery. What if she got married? What if she wanted a family? Her mother told her deaf people shouldn't have families, but Etta's teacher at the deaf school had a hearing son, and both she and her husband were deaf. Etta looked over at her mother. She wasn't a beautiful woman, but she made up for it by dressing in fashionable clothes. Mother was particularly fond of the pinstriped ladies' trousers she wore this morning. She and her neatly pressed blouse hid behind the woman's magazine, The Newland. Etta tapped her mother's leg to get her attention. "Why don't you want to talk about it?" she said in sign language. "About what?" her mother signed and returned to her reading. Obviously, she didn't want to talk. Etta tapped mother's leg again. "About why I'm here." "It's a small surgery. You won't feel a thing. Can't you see I'm reading? I'm 20 and I have a right to know the details." Mother looked annoyed and her hands shook with anger when she signed. "The Führer says, and I agree, Etta, that deafness isn't something we would wish on anyone. It's a hereditary defect. The Fuhrer says we need space for healthy people. What's there to talk about? I like children. You want more people to be deaf? Is that what you're saying? Etta let her hand fall in her lap. She stared at her mother, and after a long moment, she signed, "Yes, that's what I'm saying. I don't think it's right. I don't agree." Chapter 14. There were footfalls in the stairwell. Slowly they came, tiptoeing. Victoria sat bolt upright. Herr Tod was back. She didn't have time to get to the corner. There was a soft tapping on the door. The key turned in the lock and the door swung open. But in the light of the lantern, she saw that the lone figure was not the baker. The halo around the lamp revealed the deaf mute, with a lantern in one hand and a basket of sweet rolls in the other. The mute intruder quickly stepped inside the attic and closed the door behind her. It seemed Victoria's visitor was content to stand there and behold the shaved-headed creature sitting on the floor. But the visitor was a strange sight to behold too. The way her unbraided hair rumpled awkwardly over boxy shoulders, wearing the fuzzy blue nightcoat that looked like she'd worn it since grammar school, the sleeves now too short. Was it possible this Nazi was capable of human kindness? Maybe she was a sleepwalker. Or maybe she was one of those Nazis that Mrs. Kosa talked about, the ones who laced food with poison just for the pleasure of watching a person die. The visitor stepped forward and, smiling, set the basket on the floor in front of Victoria. She had to have been the one to leave the very large Kaiser roll under the grain sack mattress, the lump Victoria had mistaken for a rat. The Kaiser roll Victoria was afraid to eat. A whole basket of poisonous sweet rolls would kill her quick. The cinnamon rolls were covered with frosting and sprinkled with raisins. Death by poison, a just punishment for someone who couldn't save her own sister from the SS, a small voice said. The deaf mute pointed at the bread and gestured impatiently, making primitive noises, telling Victoria she should eat. If this was a dream, she didn't want to wake up until she had finished eating the entire contents of the basket. The bread was soft in her mouth, and she nibbled the first bite carefully, waiting to notice anything unusual after she swallowed. She counted to 60 and lived to take another bite. Victoria's stomach was unwilling to let guilt or the thought of her friends hungry and cold at the factories deny her the sheer pleasure of devouring this lovely basket of bread. She licked frosting from her fingers and realized suddenly that she had forgotten to pray, and quickly crossed herself as she finished the last bite of sweet roll. All the while, the deaf girl smiled, watching, and then she got down on the mat with Victoria, sitting close, closer than was natural for strangers to be. She brought her lantern close and took a pencil lead and a tablet of paper from her nightcoat pocket and wrote down her name in big letters, Etta Tod, holding it in front of Victoria's face. And that's my section of readings for tonight. I hope you enjoyed them. And now let's just open it up, Michael, for some questions.
All right. Do you want to unmute everyone? There's not so many people that it should.
No, right.
Yeah.
I'm going to go to gallery too so I can see everyone.
Excellent. Me too.
Is Pam? Hey, Pam. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to meet the woman who made my book dream come true, Pam Knight, all the way from Austin, Texas, my publisher at Plainview Press. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for coming, Pam. Is there anyone else that's new that showed up? No. When did you get here, Pam? She's still muted. Maybe she doesn't know how to.
Connecting to audio.
There you go.
Oh.
No.
Still muted, Pam.
Maybe she can't hear you. Can someone type her a message?
Can you hear me now?
There you are.
I'm logged in. I'm logged in twice.
Oh yeah, I think you're feeding back.
I'm trying to leave and come back.
Let me see if I can get rid of this other you. Oh wait, she's gone.
Oops.
Well,
Now,
At
can you
least
hear me?
yeah, we can hear you now. Yes, I can hear you.
There. How's that?
Perfect.
Much better.
I had a hard time getting in, and then I got in twice, and I couldn't figure it out. So
Not a problem. I'm just really happy to see your face. Did you get to hear any of the story?
I did.
Okay.
It was
Good.
very nice. It's nice to hear you read it, you know, because you know the story so well. And, you know, reading it yourself is one thing, but hearing the author's rendition is really nice.
Thank you. I am super excited also to tell everyone here that the audiobook is going to be coming out in a couple of months.
Cool.
And we have a really wonderful voiceover artist, an actress in LA that's doing the reading, and it's really interesting. She's French, born in Germany, speaks Italian, English, and German, and there's actually quite a bit of German in the book for those of you who, and I think probably most of the people who are here today have read the book. So she handles the German so well. So it's going to be super fun to have that come out and get that promotion going. But who's going to start with a question?
Start with the question.
Okay.
10 years is a long time to stick with writing one book. Can you tell us a little bit about that journey, why it took 10 years? Was it always a steady flow of writing?
Maybe my husband can answer why it took.
I love hearing about the journeys of books.
Well, I was practicing psychotherapy. I had 2 kids in high school, and I was writing in my field and happily publishing articles about psychotherapy when we first heard about my cousin who, and I had never even heard that Polish Catholics were forced into slave labor, but so in the middle of a very busy life, I hear this recording 50 years after the war is over. My cousin finds us and sends us this letter of introduction with a tape recording, just a brief story of her when she was kidnapped from the village in Poland and ended up in Germany in slave labor and was imprisoned there. And I was so taken by this story that that summer, we had to get through graduation. I went to meet her, and that was when she explained to me that there were thousands of people at the train station. There was this auction style selling of women, and I was like the rest of the United States, and even now, most people don't know that 1.7 million Polish Catholics were rounded up, abducted, and kidnapped and taken to Germany, never to return. My cousin's mother did not know where she went, and her brother was with her. So I went to Denver and I interviewed her. I met my new cousins, and when that trip was over, she asked me one thing. She said, would you write my story down? Well, and I wanted to, but I was working full time and we had kids, and I needed to find out more. I had no idea who had even heard of this huge slave labor campaign. It was the largest wartime slave operation in modern history. I hadn't heard of it. I mean, had you guys ever heard of such a thing? No. And So I had to do a lot of research. I read volumes of books, Sharon, and I wanted to go on research trips. So I did eventually travel to Germany and Poland. And, I interviewed ethnic Poles, which is what they call a Catholic Pole, Jewish Poles, Germans, and it just took a very long time to get all of those facts together. And this sort of biofiction, it just takes a long time. And so that's why it took me so long. Traveling, writing, raising kids, taking them to college. I closed my practice finally. And so yeah, and then Pam happened, wherever she is. So I'm working on my next book. So hopefully it won't take 10 years because I'll be too old by then.
That was my question, is what you were working on next.
I'm working on, it's more of a women's thriller, kind of an FBI thriller based in Poland, takes place in 2010 during the downing of an airplane. I don't know if you remember, but the president of Poland was flying to celebrate the 75th anniversary of the Katyn massacre. And this was when 20,000 Polish military officers were executed by Russia. And so the Polish president in 2010 is flying for this anniversary, and his plane mysteriously crashes over the forest of Katyn. And so I am taking that, again, another historical fact, and writing a fiction about it. The main female protagonist is a Polish journalist. I have a Polish, also our equivalent of the FBI, and then the historical. So then there'll be a woman, and she's actually a real person who was a pilot, a Polish female pilot in World War II, who's the only woman who was among those who died at Katyn. So, the gory details is what I just seem to be writing about. But it's a really fun book though. So it's totally different in the sense that it's more of a thriller.
Yeah, and once again, I haven't heard that. I don't remember that history, so that makes it even more interesting to me.
Okay, cool. Yeah, it's what really inspires me to write these stories is finding those untold stories that have female characters, and then going with it. I really love history. I love the details. I love bringing forth these women's stories that haven't been told and giving them a voice. It's super meaningful. So it's my art, and also just giving voice to history. And I love it.
When we first heard Catherine's story on a tape recording driving up by Maryhill and the dry hills up there, I was just so moved by her tape recorded account of her experience that I told Catherine Hamilton, you have to write that story. And I had no idea what I was getting her into.
Uh-huh.
And years later, not so many years later, after she went to Poland, then I went to Poland with her, and I went to Poland with her more than once, and I think about 3 times. And one time she had written a section, which is no longer in the book, there wasn't room for it, but she wrote a section set in Warsaw about a battle near the Vistula River. And we went to find that river, that road where that battle had taken place. And we couldn't find it, and then the way she had described it, I looked over in a little different direction, and there was a line of trees where that road used to be. I said, that's where that battle was. It's like she knew everything about what happened there, as if from a spiritual communication of some kind.
Well, that, and I'm really into maps, ladies and gentlemen. I love maps, and I map out all of the towns. and I had maps of Warsaw, and I read so much about the battles, and I really enjoyed those, and I did have to cut them, but yeah, so I had maps of this particular street, Woda, and so I had the original map from, you know, these old battles. And so when we went there, we were following the roads, and then there was like no road, but I had seen the you know 70-year-old map somewhere I found online. So, but it was a really interesting journey, really moving journey for me, for sure. And having so many people read and review and comment on the power of my characters and the power of the story has been huge. I don't know, I don't really care how many, just that you guys read the book, that's enough. So thank you for reading my story.
Well,
What
as a publisher, I'm going to tell you, people love maps. They really help to solidify historical fiction. And so think about that as you continue. Maybe you don't want to cut out the chapter next time. And I know you probably did because of all the feedback you got. I know you went through a really thorough process to develop a good book, which I appreciate. A lot of times we get books that are in very remedial shape and need a lot of work still, and yours was not like that. I was wondering if you might speak just a little bit about your artwork, your cover and your other.
Sure. So when it was time to start talking about the cover, Pam told me that, well, you will have some input on the cover, and do you have any artists or artwork that you like? And I had absolutely fallen in love with this particular artist who lives in Colorado, and she does mostly oil paintings of women. And I wish I would have brought, hey Greg, do you want to hand me the artwork of Etta and Mrs. Cosa? They're in here in the library.
Yes, I'll come get them.
And so I found this, I had been following this woman on Instagram that I loved her paintings. And so I pitched the idea to her. I said, well, you know, she's not a book cover artist, right? She's an artist. And Pam liked her style. And so I sent her a copy of the, I sent her the synopsis. I sent her some chapters of Victoria and the description in the book of the attic where Victoria is held, and you can see that this is the actual painting. And she said, well, you have the option of actually getting the painting if you want it. Otherwise, if I just make this tiny copy, well, you know, then it doesn't turn into anything. So I definitely wanted the painting, and that's that. And then since then, for promotion, so Jennifer's artwork is on my website, and it's katherineahamilton.com. You can buy prints, small prints of her artwork, the Victoria's War artwork, or any of her artwork. And since then, for promotional purposes, she also did a picture of Etta. Can you see that?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think you've all read the story, so I'm not going to do any spoilers by saying, do you notice the tiling here at the bottom? Does anybody recognize that?
Mm-hmm.
Does anybody know what this symbolizes in the story?
Been too long since I read it.
Okay, so
The
remember,
Melodies Patch? The patch?
it's Hadamar's tile floor. In the back of the book, there's a picture of the Hadamar shower. So if you haven't read it, I don't want to say anymore. but yeah, so that's Etta in the attic with the symbol of Hadamar, which her mother always threatened her with. And this is the other painting of Mrs. Cosa, who I didn't talk about, but she's kind of a sidekick of Victoria's. And I love her to pieces because she was kind of the tough side of me, and we had to have we had to have a really strong woman in there to survive. So then of course I had all the photographs that are in the back of the book, and that's why I did not include maps, because I didn't want to overwhelm my reader. But there is, the afterword is full of photographs, and Pam managed to get them all in there beautifully, and I get so many comments about that. And then there's the reader's guide, which is really cool because we have roses there. But
And the cover art, the woman on the cover is actually, the artist comes from the picture of the attic created by the artist, and the woman's, Etta was a artist, right?
Right.
And so this is the picture of Victoria that Etta painted, and is on the easel in the full picture. And so this is, the cover is actually a subset of the of the full painting, which is in the book. So it's really nice.
So I didn't know about this because I think it's your dad's side of the family, right?
yeah.
Yeah. So I'm not related to these people, but and I'm only like a few chapters in, so
Okay.
yeah. So don't give me too many spoilers, but as like from a writer's perspective, I'm interested about like the characters and the historical, and where you decided to start and stop the narrative, if it was more based on historical events or like character events, if that makes sense.
Okay, so as you know, when you're writing a story, Rachel, I know Rachel's a writer and an author of short stories and also a novella. And you write your draft, and it's this thing, and then 7 drafts later it's something else. So after I did my research, I realized that Catherine's story was one thing, but that it was bigger than that. There was so much more. There were so many people involved and so many stories to tell. So these characters were composites. They became, layers of people's stories. And Mrs. Cosa, for example, was a brand new character in my last version. Etta was always beloved by everyone, and she had a small role. And I had these war scenes. There were male viewpoint characters, and they had a huge part of the book. And so when those were cut, just at the suggestion of, I had an agent and editors, and through one version. And so we cut the male characters and built Etta in. I built Etta, but they said, well, we love Etta, but you need to do more. So I set out creating this whole life for Etta Tod before she met Victoria. And so there were all of these historical facts that happened, but the characters had to have their 3-part character arc. They had to begin somewhere and have their crises and have their dilemmas and reach, their character change, and then the end of the story. So there was plotting that I had to do. Victoria was a harder character to write because she was so close. And it was Etta that, because I was so free to create her completely out of my inspiration, that her story became the artist in me. She was my artist me, right? And so I think that through the drafts one of the things that my last editor said to me was, but Kathy, whose story is this? Because I had so many viewpoint characters, and it was big. And so I had to narrow it down, that this was Victoria and Etta's story. And anyone else that was going to be in there was going to have to be in their viewpoint. There was one other, I did sneak one, and this won't ruin it for you, Rachel, that I did have one other viewpoint, female, that I added in, and it was just fine because it was necessary because they were in a different place. And yeah, so I'm super happy with the simplification. It's tough as a writer to, I basically have a whole nother book because I took it in half that is just these two male viewpoint characters and what they went through during the war. So, and it sits there on my desktop.
The first draft, from my point of view, was a great sprawling war story like Gone with the Wind or War and Peace. It had stories and sub-stories and intertwined stories, and it was just fabulous and beautiful. But people just don't publish stories like that now. She needed to write it more like a story that had a character arc, and that's what she did. It is fabulous.
So I haven't asked you this, but was the ending based on your on any kind of reality of your Catherine, or was it just your imagination?
No, that the story generally, this final version still generally followed those people, not just Catherine, but a colleague of mine just came out with this book here, Wearing the Letter P. Half of the 1.7 million Polish Catholics that were kidnapped were women, and this is Polish women in forced labor in Nazi Germany. And she just has page after page. You can see what I do to my books. But these women went through these things. They were picked up, they were auctioned off, and they were stuck in a labor camp, or they were stuck on a farm. And then then when the war was over, they were basically stranded because they couldn't return. Most of them could not safely return to communist Poland. And so they were in displaced camps for up to 5 years. And these camps were, some of them were previous labor camps, some of them were army bases that the Germans had vacated. And so the ending, I don't want to spoil it for Rachel, but the endings did follow true with the stories that I came across. And she did, she did kind of carry through this entire line of truths, like so many of the women did. This is why it's so important, if you have friends and neighbors that you can share the story with. I think it's an important one that certainly we are all very aware of and respectful of the horrors of the Holocaust and what happened to our Jewish brothers and sisters. And this is just another piece of that. And why didn't we know about this? I think we have to remember that the Iron Curtain fell when the war was over. There was no celebration in Poland about the end of the war. They were occupied by the Russians, and basically my cousin made it to America, but she couldn't communicate with anyone in Poland. They censored mail. She couldn't come back for her mother's funeral. It wasn't until after the Iron Curtain fell that she finally was able to go back to Poland and piece together where her relatives lived in the US. And that was just in the 90s, So it's hard to imagine, and people go, how could you not know? Well, nobody knew. Nobody knew about it. She didn't know where we were until after the Iron Curtain fell in the 90s. So pretty amazing stuff. How are we doing on time? It's getting close. Anybody else have a question? Richard, I know you read my book. Richard was my Toastmaster mentor. And when I got my book, when Plainview Press agreed to publish Victoria's War, I go, I'm gonna have to do events, and I'm gonna have to stand up in front of people and talk. And so I just Googled Toastmasters and I found this Nano Toastmaster group not far from my house. And so I attended that and I really loved it. It was so much fun. And Richard was the vice president of that group. So thanks. It's really good to see you, buddy.
It's great to see. And it was, we enjoyed having you. It's always good to have people from outside the company joining. And of course, 6 months ago, we went totally online for Toastmasters. And you said at the time, well, I don't really enjoy this, but you've now spent the last 6 months being an author online. So I think it all worked out very well.
It did. And that's the thing. We practiced getting up and standing up and talking in front of, live audiences. And then all of a sudden the COVID hit. And it's like, okay, so now we're having all these Zoom meetings with my Toastmasters. I'm going, this is not helping me. And then all my events turned into this. So always feel like there's kind of a plan going on and I just try and go with it. But yeah, tell everybody hi for me. And
Will do, yes. Yeah, so we enjoyed, hearing about over the year, hearing about bits of your book and also sort of your journey to the launch. So it was the two sides, both bits of your book and how it came about, because you talked about that a few times, and then just, seeing the arc for you as an author going from, well, I have a book coming out in a year to, obviously then through that year to it coming out. So it was a different experience for us. So we enjoyed that side of it as well.
Mm-hmm.
What I liked about Catherine was that from the beginning, she announced this as her first novel, which means there's going to be a second, which is really good. And most first authors are just clueless. They're like, well, what do I do? What do I do next? Well, she just took the bull by the horns and she whipped around her publicity team. Like if she needed something from me, she got it. And if I needed something from her, she got it. I got it. And she was just really, really on top of it. And I appreciated that as a new author. And the fact that she's serious about letting people know about her book makes a huge difference, because it's very competitive. When people go to buy a book, there's so many books. And so how do you know what's good? And when an author will stand up for themselves and say, take a look at this, it really makes a big difference. So I appreciate her a lot.
Thanks, Pam. Thanks for all the support.
Yeah. Are y'all all, everybody from Portland here, or?
Let's see, how many people are from the Portland area? I think most, yeah, almost everyone except for you, Pam. Yeah. And I specifically targeted the Portland group because we're going to be doing something in Texas in October. So, and Pam will be there. So I did that on purpose, and I did work with the publicity team here in Portland, and they were super helpful. And yeah, it's all just been a huge learning experience. You have to create a brand. Okay, so what's a brand? Well, it's not just the book, it's you and your book. And so the publicity team helped me figure out how to do that, and it made a huge impact. All the reviews that we got right when we launched the book, that was because of really being on top of the advanced reviews and sending out ARCs and doing all that stuff. So anyway, well, Michael.
Can you remind the Portland people where they can get it here in Portland? They
Just put that in the chat.
Well,
Link to the buy the book directly from Annie Blooms.
Well, these people here, we're going to annieblooms.com, and you can just write inside their little search line Victoria's War, and it pops up, and you can get, like I said, your signed copy with a very cool bookmark that has the artwork on it. And people have really enjoyed those. So also, Michael, I don't know if you knew, but my website also has on my homepage, you're one of the where to buy. So you can, because there's the signed copies, I think that's a big plus for people. And we have people I know trying to get you to send books to Canada. And I'm not sure, somebody's hollering at Mom. But anyway, I think the signed copies, if we just keep telling people they're signed, people like that. And sounds like Mama has to go tend to someone, but again, I want to thank you all for joining me tonight and for all your support, each and every one of you. And it's been a really fun journey, and we'll just keep going forward, and we'll wait maybe a year from now, we'll be doing my next book.
They'll be in store.
Yeah.
Yeah, hopefully.
Let's hope.
Oh, get busy.
Copy, so you can sign my copy.
What did you say? Oh,
We'll have to meet up for social distance coffee so you can sign my copy.
absolutely. Absolutely. So
All right, thanks so much, everyone. A great audience.
thanks, Mike.
Good to
Thank
see
you
you,
so
Michael.
Yeah, have a good night, everyone.
Thanks,
Good night.
everyone.
All right.
Hi, Kathy.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks, Pam.
Thank you.